It was late summer, 1975. Outside the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, the crowd had thinned. Most fans were gone. But Elvis saw one girl leaning against her car, shoulders shaking. He walked straight toward her. This story isn't about spotlights or fame. It's about one quiet act of kindness that still brings tears today. If you believe moments like this matter, stay with us until the end. Elvis steps off stage, drenched in sweat, lights dimming, crowd still buzzing. The band struck the final note, and the roar of 12,000 voices shook the concrete walls. The Mid-South Coliseum smelled of popcorn, cigarette smoke, and spilled soda. Fans waved scarves, tossed roses, and called his name long after the curtain began to close. Backstage, Elvis pulled the microphone from his lips, head low, hair damp with sweat. The spotlight faded, leaving a haze of dust glittering in the beam. He handed the mic to a stagehand, then nodded once to his band. No words were needed. They had delivered another night to remember. He slipped into a white jacket, the fabric catching the light as he moved toward the exit. An usher stacked folding chairs along the aisle, the scrape of metal against concrete echoing in the hollowing arena. The rush of fans through the doors sounded like ocean waves, loud and then fading with each moment. Elvis paused. He adjusted his collar, looked back once at the emptying seats, and smiled faintly. This was his kingdom. But something about this night felt unfinished. The hallways backstage buzzed with activity, security barking orders, crew packing amplifiers, paper cups crunching underfoot. One bodyguard whispered, "Car's ready." Elvis nodded, but he lingered, listening to the distant murmur of the dispersing crowd as he walked down the ramp toward the waiting limousine. He caught sight of the parking lot through the glass doors. Neon lamps glowed in the humid Memphis air. Beyond the gates, fans were piling into cars, headlights flaring against the night. Laughter mixed with the low rumble of engines, but then a stillness. One figure not moving, near the edge of the lot, leaning against a dented Ford sedan. A girl stood alone. Her head was bowed, shoulders trembled. In her hand, a scrap of paper or maybe a ticket stub crumpled tight. Elvis slowed his steps. The driver opened the limo door, but Elvis didn't get in. He was staring. Something about her stopped him cold. The bodyguard muttered, "Come on, boss. It's late." Elvis ignored him. He kept watching the girl. Every other fan had gone home with smiles, souvenirs, and memories. But this one, she looked like she had lost everything. He slid into the limo at last, but his eyes stayed locked on her. The driver started the engine. Elvis leaned forward, tapped the glass, and said quietly, "Hold on a minute." The bodyguards exchanged nervous glances. Stopping in a public parking lot after midnight wasn't protocol. Not for the most famous man in the world. But Elvis's gaze didn't move. And in that moment, the king of rock and roll knew the night wasn't over. But while most left smiling, one fan couldn't move from the parking lot. A lone girl, early 20s, clutching a crumpled ticket stub, crying near a dented Ford sedan. The parking lot was thinning fast. Headlights swept across the cracked pavement as cars rolled away, one after another. Engines rumbled, radios blared snippets of Elvis songs replayed on local stations, and laughter trailed into the humid Memphis night. But near the far corner, under a buzzing lamp, a girl stayed still. She leaned against a dented Ford sedan, arms wrapped around herself, shoulders shaking. The light above flickered, casting her face in broken flashes of shadow and pale yellow dot in her hand. She clutched a ticket stub, creased and damp. Her fingers trembled as though she couldn't let it go. According to witnesses later, her name was Marie, a nursing student from just outside the city. Early 20s, brown hair pulled back with a loose ribbon that had slipped halfway undone. The night air was thick, carrying the faint smell of exhaust mixed with fried food from the concession stands. Every time a car passed, the gust lifted the hem of her skirt and made the ticket flutter in her hand. She didn't move. She didn't wave for anyone's attention. She just cried. From across the lot, a pair of stagehands loading gear noticed her. "Looks like she lost somebody," one whispered, but they kept moving. For them, the night was over. Inside the limousine, Elvis sat back in his seat, but his eyes never left the window. Through the tinted glass, he saw her head bowed, saw the way her shoulders rose and fell with every breath. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was breaking down. Elvis leaned forward again, his voice low. "Stop the car." The driver hesitated, glancing toward the bodyguards. It wasn't standard. Not this late, not in a public lot. But Elvis didn't repeat himself. His eyes stayed locked on the girl. The limo eased to the side. The engine idled. Security shifted nervously, scanning the lot for stragglers. A couple of fans across the street shouted his name, but Elvis didn't wave. His focus was fixed. Marie wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving faint streaks on her cheeks. She didn't notice the limousine creeping closer. She didn't notice the window rolled down slightly. She was lost in her own grief. The ticket stub pressed so tight it nearly tore. And then the door clicked open. Elvis Presley himself stepped out, his white jacket glowing faintly under the parking lot lamp. The guards stiffened, ready to pull him back, but he brushed them aside. He was walking toward her. Elvis, against all advice, told his driver to stop. The door swung wide, and the humid night air rushed into the limousine. For a split second, no one moved. Then Elvis placed one polished boot on the pavement, his white jacket catching the glow of the parking lot lamp. The bodyguards reacted instantly, stepping in close, shoulders squared. "Boss, let's not," one began, but Elvis cut him off with a raised hand. His face was calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on the girl. Marie lifted her head at the sound of the door. Her eyes were red, cheeks streaked with tears. She froze when she realized who was standing only a few feet away. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Elvis walked toward her, slow, steady, each step deliberate. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes. Behind him, the limo's headlights spilled across the pavement, throwing his shadow long. When he reached her, he stopped just an arm's length away. His voice was low, softer than she expected. "Honey," he said gently, "what's the matter?" Marie tried to answer, but her breath caught. She clutched the ticket stub tighter. For a moment, it seemed she might stay silent, but then the words spilled out, cracked and uneven. He died in Vietnam. 2 weeks ago, the guards shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. The driver lowered his eyes. The whole lot seemed to fall silent, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Marie's voice trembled. "He bought these tickets months back. Said we'd come together. I didn't want to, but I came anyway." She looked down at the stub in her hand, tears dripping onto the paper. "And now I don't know why I'm even here." Elvis stood perfectly still. For once, the man known for never missing a beat had no ready words. He slowly reached up, removed his dark sunglasses, and tucked them into his jacket pocket. His eyes, tired, lined, but steady, met hers. Then, without a word, he lowered himself down, one knee resting on the pavement. He was now eye level with her, the king of rock and roll kneeling in a parking lot. Marie's breath shook. No cameras, no spotlight, no crowd roaring his name. Just him, inches away, his presence grounding her. Elvis leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't quick. It wasn't staged. He held her long enough for her sobs to soften, long enough for her to feel she wasn't alone in that moment. The bodyguards glanced at each other, unsure whether to intervene or stand guard. For once, the man they were sworn to protect wasn't worried about himself. When he finally pulled back, Elvis kept one hand on her shoulder. His voice was quiet but firm. "You're not alone. You hear me?" Marie nodded through her tears, and yet Elvis wasn't finished. But Elvis didn't stop with a hug. The bodyguards inched forward, tension written across their faces. Parking lot encounters could spiral out of control, and they knew it. But Elvis didn't budge. Still kneeling in front of Marie, he lifted a hand without looking back. The gesture was clear: stand down. The lot was nearly empty now, but a handful of stragglers lingered in the shadows. They watched from a distance, whispering, unsure if what they were seeing was real. Elvis reached for Marie's hand, large and steady, and folded her trembling fingers into his. His voice dropped even softer, almost conspiratorial. "This one's just for you." Marie's eyes widened. Her breath hitched. Before she could react, Elvis began to sing. The first line of "Love Me Tender" slipped out, quiet, unaccompanied. No band, no reverb, no screaming fans. Just the raw voice that had carried him from Tupelo to the world. Love me tender, love me sweet. The humid night seemed to pause. Even the buzzing lamp overhead quieted in her mind. Marie's tears slowed as she clutched his hand, the words wrapping around her like a blanket. A couple exiting the far gate froze mid-step, recognizing the sound. One of them gasped, covering her mouth. The soft shuffle of their feet stopped completely, as if afraid to break the spell. Elvis sang each line slower than usual, dragging out the tenderness, holding her gaze. He wasn't performing. He was comforting. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and instead of ruining the moment, it deepened it. It reminded everyone listening that even legends carry their own weight. Marie closed her eyes. For a brief eternity, the grief pressing on her chest eased. She wasn't in a parking lot anymore. She was suspended in a bubble of sound, a song meant for her alone. Behind them, one of the guards exhaled audibly, shoulders lowering. The driver rested his hands on the wheel, watching through the mirror, forgetting the schedule entirely. As the verse neared its end, Elvis softened even more, until the last note trembled into silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint hum of the Colosseum lights far behind them. Marie opened her eyes, and fresh tears spilled, but this time they weren't jagged. They were softer, gentler, threaded with gratitude instead of despair. Elvis gave her hand one last squeeze before releasing it. His eyes didn't leave hers. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling on the pavement. But he didn't step back, because the hug and the song weren't the end. There was still one more thing he wanted to leave her with, something she would carry for the rest of her life. And when the last note faded, Elvis did something else, something she never expected. The song had ended, but Elvis wasn't ready to leave her with silence. He reached slowly into his pocket, and when his hand came back out, he was holding a scarf. It was soft, white, faintly stained with makeup and sweat from the stage just minutes before. Marie blinked, uncertain. Elvis stepped closer. He lifted her wrist gently, the way one might handle porcelain, fragile but worth protecting. With a careful motion, he tied the scarf around her wrist. His fingers lingered just long enough for her to feel the weight of the gesture. He looked her in the eyes. His voice was steady, lower than a whisper, but clear enough to be remembered word for word. "Every time you feel alone," he told her, "you remember you got family." Marie gasped. The words weren't rehearsed, not lines from a performance. They were simple, direct, and exactly what she needed. Her other hand rose instinctively, brushing the edge of the scarf, holding it like a lifeline. Somewhere nearby, a disposable camera clicked. A flash burst briefly, catching the pair in silhouette. Elvis leaning forward, Marie's wrist adorned with the scarf, the parking lot lamp glowing above them. The image would later circulate quietly among fans, proof of a moment few believed until they saw it. The handful of witnesses stood frozen, their voices hushed. He just stopped for her. One whispered to another, disbelief thick in their tone. Nobody rushed forward, nobody screamed. They simply watched, as though afraid to intrude on something sacred. Elvis glanced briefly at the onlookers, then back to Marie. She had stopped crying, though tears still shimmered on her cheeks. Her breaths came slower now, more controlled, anchored by his presence. For Elvis, this wasn't just about comfort. It was about recognition, about making sure she knew that her pain was seen. That even in the chaos of fame and security details, her heartbreak mattered. The scarf fluttered slightly in the breeze, edges catching the lamplight. Marie touched it again, her lips trembling, but this time she managed a word. "Thank you." Elvis gave the faintest nod, his expression unreadable but warm. To anyone else, it might have looked like a small gesture, but for Marie, it was a lifeline. Behind him, the limo engine purred. The guards exchanged looks, shifting their weight. They had waited longer than they thought possible, and still he lingered. Finally, Elvis straightened his shoulders, gave Marie one last look, and stepped back. It seemed the moment was over, but the truth was, the story of that night had only just begun, because what happened in that parking lot would not stay there. But the story didn't end in that parking lot. Sunlight broke over Memphis the next morning, warm and heavy, carrying the hum of cicadas through open windows. Most fans remembered the concert for the energy, the songs, the spectacle, but a small circle of witnesses carried a different story, one they couldn't keep to themselves. At 7 a.m., a local radio DJ cut into his usual playlist of Elvis hits. His voice came through the static, more excited than usual. "Folks, I gotta tell you what I heard last night. They say Elvis stopped in the parking lot. Not for reporters, not for cameras, for one girl, crying by her car, and he sang to her. Phone lines lit up within minutes. Callers confirmed it. Some claimed they saw him kneel. Others swore they heard the faint strains of Love Me Tender floating across the lot. One woman said she caught it on her camera flash. By noon, the station was overwhelmed with messages. By evening, the story had jumped into print. The Memphis Press-Scimitar ran a short column. Elvis Comfort's grieving fan. It didn't give a name, but the description was clear enough that Marie recognized herself instantly at her kitchen table. Marie sat hunched over the folded paper. The scarf was still tied around her wrist, now faintly stained with her own tears from the night before. The radio played softly in the background, another DJ retelling the same account. Almost word for word, she pressed the scarf to her lips, overwhelmed. For the first time since her fiancé's funeral, she felt something other than emptiness. She felt seen across Memphis. The story spread like a ripple on water. Neighbors mentioned it at grocery counters. Strangers swapped it over diner coffee. Each retelling grew more powerful, more unbelievable. A superstar at the height of his fame, stepping into the shadows to comfort a single heartbroken fan. Marie didn't ask for the attention. She stayed home, quiet, listening as her private grief turned into a public legend. Part of her wanted to hide. Another part felt a strange comfort knowing others had witnessed it, that people believed kindness like that could happen. She thought the memory of that night was the only thing she would keep. But she was wrong, because just as the story reached its peak in Memphis, something new was about to arrive. Not gossip, not rumor, something personal. But just when she thought it was over, a package arrived at her door.